Man, this update is incredible. Now, the most obvious thing that came out of this is the fact we finally explored the moon. That idea is really novel to me, but hey, it happened. Now, true, the Project Moongazer is indeed as straightforward as we learned from the quest itself. I admit, I cried a bit at the end, but what if I tell you the whole context of this project, why it exists, and hidden interaction with the moon goddesses made this even more depressing. After I learn and read everything from this update myself, this really strengthens my opinion that I don't side with anyone because all of them have their own reasons and purpose. Oh, you really think after I read this I'll be siding with either the dragons or Phanes? Psych! No. After reading multiple times, I came to realize that no one is right or wrong because this update really tells you that everyone is fighting for survival. It's not about Nibelung versus TEYVAT or TEYVAT versus the Abyss anymore. It's about the universe versus the Abyss, and this update beautifully gives us that wake-up call. That said, this quest might make you support either the dragons or Phanes more, or you might even change your perspective. But for this video, we'll take a look at this world quest as objective and neutral as possible because out of all the quests we got so far, I believe this is where we finally get to learn both sides of the story. What makes their actions justified? Why did Nibelung leave TEYVAT? And why Phanes took over TEYVAT? Today, we'll do a short recap of Project Moongazer questline and we can start both our analysis and theories from there. As always, don't forget to give this video a like and comment so the channel can be noticed by the algorithm. My name is Genshin and I make lore and commentary videos on this channel to keep you company. Before we continue, I just want to let you guys know that I am opening art commissions on Vgen. If you're interested in supporting this channel, click the link in the description or pinned comment and check my portfolio there if you're interested. Alright, now back to the video. Now remember, there will be my opinions and theories sprinkled along the way. You don't have to agree with me, but don't be offended over disagreements or opinions whether from the video itself or from other comments. Also, no lore leaks in the comments. I won't gatekeep you with gameplay leaks, but don't talk about lore or story related leaks here. To avoid confusion, my traveler of choice is Aether, so I'll be referring to the main traveler as he and the sibling as Lumin. There might be some occasional they and our sibling here and there, but just know that I'll be using Aether as the main traveler for this video. So let's start with a short recap first. I'll mention some of the notes along the way, but I'll give more context in a different section after I recap them. The quest starts in Ysna'qurel where the traveler and Paimon accidentally ride a spaceship to the Frost Moon after following a mysterious black Kuuhenki named Ninnin, also known as Eggy as to what Paimon later nicknamed her. To avoid confusion, I'll just call her Eggy in this video. The traveler and co crashed at the Eye of Nibelung, a tower that was meant to recapture what was believed to be Nibelung's signal after the first dragon pioneer arrived at the moon. That pioneer's name is Nibelung, hence the tower's name. While they managed to find the first one prior to its construction, the project came from finding Nibelung's whereabouts to become a research facility as they were no longer able to receive the same signal after Nibelung passed away. Another researcher named Ungien did not believe this to be Nibelung and instead created a facility called Ungien's Circle to capture life forms that are not from TEYVAT. Years later, he found the same signal from the Eye of Nibelung, and in order to investigate where the signal came from, he rode a ship called the Moongazer and traveled beyond the moon and TEYVAT. After living far away from his homeworld, the signal was indeed not from Nibelung, but from another planet named Throg and was sent by its ruler named Ysna'qurel in the form of a black creature, warning those who caught the signal about the Abyss. Whether this creature came from Throg or not can't be verified, but one thing for certain is that the message first came from Ysna'qurel, who also received a similar message before. In order to really understand this message, Ungien decided to merge himself with the creature and was transformed into a black spiky fine creature. When the Moongazer returned and crashed into Ungien Circle's capture station, he was already found in a very dire condition and later died in the process after he relayed the message. He was then transformed into a giant Kuuhenki that we fought in the quest, transformed by his wife Maagees-Geti by combining it with the Frost Moon's Archeolun energy. Maagees soon became obsessed with researching these life forms, sending messages to outer space, and creating even more of these black Kuuhenkis within Ungien's containment lab, hence why we see so many of them in Ungien's circle. Worth noting that despite their colors, they are not related to the Abyss as they're actually data-based life forms. The dragons already knew about the Abyss prior to this since Nibelung left to solve the abyssal problem once and for all, but this condition is the first time they found how dire the situation is, making them further advance their technology even more seriously. With that, the message that Ungien captured was then used as the main goal of Project Moongazer, to send back the message that Ysna'qurel sent to the rest of the universe, basically warning them of the dangers of the Abyss. Even so, another main reason for this project is not only to warn, but also to give them hope that they are not alone in fighting this abyssal calamity. After learning this message, a disciple of Ungien and Maagees named Lusalim created a project called Project Lunar Veil in order to hide TEYVAT from the Abyss. During this time, he also had a daughter named Ninkigia. Another researcher named Maagees-Geti told Lusalim to create a barrier that can cover Ungien's circle and do more research from there. As for Maagees, who was already on the verge of dying, she turned herself into a giant Kuuhenki with the help of Lusalim, who then continued on with Maagees and Ungien's research. Regardless, Noor still finds the Lunar Veil project to be uninspiring. Whether they hide themselves or not, the Abyss will find them. So, Lusalim's plan is basically just delaying that destruction. Despite that, Maagees-Geti still conducted an experiment based on Lusalim's project. Ignoring the fancy words, basically, to actually hide TEYVAT, you have to alter the rules of TEYVAT. But if you want to hide TEYVAT from the rest of the universe, you have to alter the rules of that universe, but he concluded that is impossible. If that sounds familiar to you, basically they were implying that they need powers that can rival the rules of TEYVAT itself. In other words, without them realizing it at the time, they need a descender. I'll explain more about this in a bit. During this time, Lusalim created a research facility on what we now know as the Moonside Sea. He first created the Lunar Veil at Ungien's circle, then he used this research result to cover the moon because sending the warning messages into the universe is very dangerous. However, as he was creating the veil, Phanes came to TEYVAT and pierced the veil. While war is underway, Lusalim gives his research away to them in hopes to really hide TEYVAT, but this also costs him to betray the dragons. Lusalim died under the judgment of the dragons, and Project Moongazer continued at the dark side of the moon. After the Lunar Veil and Lusalim's research was surrendered to Phanes, all of the dragon researchers became lunar lifeforms with Ninkigia as the only researcher left. In order to continue with the project, Lusalim already asked permission with the goddesses beforehand, and they agreed to help the dragons with this project. Using all of the researchers' data that Ninkigia and Lusalim collected, she then gathered them into the moon's core, and with the moon goddess's authority of life, she created a black Kuuhenki. This project became a cycle as one Kuuhenki will be born from the moon's core, slowly grew to realize its mission by consuming data across the moon, gained the key at the moon's core again, returned to the Eye of Nibelung to activate Project Moongazer to send a message, and the cycle repeats itself. Eggy is one of them, inheriting Ninkigia's nickname, Nin Nin. As implied, there are plenty of other black Kuuhenkis that send messages about TEYVAT to the universe, with the current Nin Nin from this quest being the most recent Kuuhenki we witnessed. Since the Frost Moon was flung beyond the full sky, Phanes were probably not aware of the Kuuhenkis sending messages to the rest of the universe, but we'll discuss about this later in the theory section. After Eggy sends the last message to the universe, the Traveler, Paimon, and Columbina left the Eye of Nibelung, and a pre-recorded message of the Traveler's siblings played prior to their arrival in TEYVAT. This is where the Project Moongazer World Quest officially ends. Now that's the short recap of the quest itself. You see, the quest is not enough to give you the whole context of the moon lore, because all of the notes you can read are actually related to what really happened. There are plenty of notes, and I do recommend you to read them yourself if you could, but here are the important bits that you need to know the most. So let's do this in chronological order, and let's start with what happened to Ungien and the origins of the Black Kuuhenkis. So, Ungien's spaceship returned to TEYVAT eventually, crashing on the capture station. For the timeline, this was before Lusalim created the Lunar Veil project, and before Phanes pierced the lunar veil that Lusalim created, but we'll talk about this in a bit. When Ungien crashed, what was found by the dragon researchers was a round creature with black spiky vine. Maagees eventually separate his consciousness from the creature, and as we learned from the quest, Ungien did merge himself with the creature to understand what the message said. Ungien died shortly after, but one thing that Maagees found when she made a deep research with the creature is that it thirsts for the dragon's bodies. I think this comes to no surprise if some of you think this creature might be Tenebra's mimesis, but that's not really the case. As far as we know, these creatures are actually just aliens, and for now, the dragons called it as the Stellar Black Body simply because of its color and the fact it's not from TEYVAT. It's not the power of the Abyss, but its property has the ability to absorb its surroundings into data. The moment you are fused with these creatures and injected with Archeolun energy, you are turned into a blue or black Kuuhenki, and Maagees called this the Black Body Matter. Now these things are harmless. Some of you might even connect these creatures to the moon vines that we found at Ungien's circle, but it has nothing to do with them, and they grow when the Archeolun energies are thrown into turmoil. Since Maagees created a lot of these black Kuuhenkis and there's also a power engine under the facility, it may explain why there's a lot of them at Ungien's circle. When Lusalim moved all of her research to another lab at Moontide Sea, and after he turned Maagees into a Kuuhenki, he grew to understand why she sent these messages, and her research on the black body matter were then used for Project Moongazer to create more of the black Kuuhenki using data of the past dragon researchers. Since the black body matter, or the black Kuuhenkis, are created by using an alien that can consume data, it's also the reason why Project Moongazer became a cycle of endless message transmission. The Inkigia's final message even thanked this creature for making the Project Moongazer happen. So to put it simply, no, the stellar black body and black body matter are not the Abyss. It's basically just an alien that consumes its surroundings for data, hence why Eggy, who is made with the same properties, has the same ability. Another important note that we need to talk about is Ungien and Ysna'qurel. Now there's actually a better translated version of this note, which is the first volume of the Moongazer's engraving. The note is basically the same, but the first note is a better translated version, while the second volume is what Ninkiga translated literally with a lot of more interesting context that Lusalim left. So before we get to more details, let's all recap a bit on the existing lore. From what we learn in Finale of the Deep Galleries and Celestial Gift, the Voyager came to TEYVAT and warned Nibelung about the Abyss. While not literally stated, we can safely assume that Nibelung informed Dragonkind about the coming threat and ordered them to further advance their civilization's technology. We already see traces of this through the Sacred Source technologies and the Space Elevator project in Otzkanatlan. With that in mind, this meant the dragons already knew the abyssal threat, as we finally learned why Nibelung left in the first place. As told in Obeyed of Morningstar and Moon, he created the moon goddesses to govern TEYVAT, while he left the world to find solutions on defeating the abyss once and for all. From this update, we learn further that Nibelung told the dragons and the moon goddesses that all life forms in the Sea of Stars are allies because they are fighting the same enemy. Just like how TEYVAT's nations describe the abyss differently, other worlds do as well. In Sumeru, they call it the Forbidden Knowledge, in the Chasm, it's the Oozing Filth, while in Notcry, it's the Wild Hunt. In TEYVAT as a whole, it's called the Abyss, while in Throg, Ysna'qurel's world, it's called the Dark Destroyer. Now back to Ungien and Ysna'qurel. So we learn in this update that Nibelung received a signal that was believed to be Nibelung. However, Ungien proved this wrong by voluntarily leaving TEYVAT using a spaceship called the Moongazer and found an alien carrying a message about the Dark Destroyer from Ysna'qurel. The message itself is actually passed down from one fallen planet to the other, and this time it's found by Ungien. Now the message itself can easily be misunderstood if you read it for the first time, especially since it uses excessively verbose words, but basically, the message talks about how the Dark Destroyer, in this case the Abyss, has devoured or destroyed worlds within the Sea of Stars. Ysna'qurel, who is an immortal in his world, was eventually defeated by the Abyss, and he said something interesting in this message. Should I send forth my messenger, the Dark Destroyer shall take notice of our worlds and bring about its death. Should I withhold my messenger, the Dark Destroyer shall also take notice of our worlds and bring about its death. In other words, whether Ysna'qurel sends his messenger to the other worlds or not, the Abyss will notice Throg anyway. So Ysna'qurel realized he only had two choices: warn the worlds and immediately be noticed by the Abyss, or not warn others but still be noticed by the Abyss anyway at a later time. No matter your choice, the Abyss will conquer your world anyway. What Ysna'qurel did was not to find help. Instead, he warns other civilizations about the threat of the Abyss, hence why he sent his messengers anyway to relay this message that was already passed down from one civilization to another. This brings us back to Nurgestuk's experiments. While Project Lunar Veil could only buy time, it could never eliminate the threat itself. If the False Sky truly follows the same principle, then what Phanes created may never have been a permanent solution, but rather a way to delay the inevitable destruction while TEYVAT search for another answer. Now that we made it this far, let's move on to the notes that are related to the Lunar Veil project. If you do the questline, you might encounter this one note that is hard to ignore. This note is the one you can read at the dark side of the moon, where Lusalim gave away all of the Lunar Veil project research to Phanes. Now in retrospect, this might sound like Lusalim is being forced by Phanes to just give away his research, and while there might be a little bit of truth to that based on his notes alone, there's actually a lot more context why he did what he did. Remember the Lunar Veil project I just talked about earlier? This project was conducted by Lusalim, and all of the process of its project can be found at Curtain Foam Black Body Containment Lab at Moonside Sea, while the origins why this project was created can be found at Nurstone Circle. Project Lunar Veil was created with one goal: to hide TEYVAT from the rest of the universe. However, according to Nurgestuk's own experiments, this was fundamentally impossible. At best, they could alter the perception of those within TEYVAT itself. Completely erasing TEYVAT's existence from every civilization across the Sea of Stars was something that even the power of a Descender could not accomplish. As to why, I think Noor's experiment showcases this very well. To demonstrate this, Noor built an intentionally hideous statue of Ungien inside his laboratory, and altered the perception of anyone entering the room, or in his own words, contaminating the room. While inside, every visitor believed the statue was completely normal, but the moment they stepped outside, that illusion immediately collapsed. Ninkigia, Lusalim's daughter, is one subject that immediately realized this anomaly after she left the lab, and the rule can only be applied if she is inside. So from that small experiment alone, I think you get where this is going, right? This is the reason why the power of a Descender, one who can rival and transcend the laws of TEYVAT, is needed to completely hide TEYVAT from the universe, but even so, completely hiding it as if it never existed within the Sea of Stars is impossible even for a Descender to achieve. In order to do that, the laws would have to span the entire cosmos. In other words, hiding TEYVAT from the entire Sea of Stars would require laws that govern not just one world, but the entire cosmos itself. That's why Noor concluded that such a solution is fundamentally impossible. Now back to Lusalim's note. This is why he ultimately handed all of the Lunar Veil project research results over to Phanes. Phanes is a Descender, someone capable of altering and rewriting TEYVAT's very laws, something the dragons themselves could never achieve unless Nibelung is there. Lusalim knew this decision would be seen as a betrayal of the dragonkind, but he also made it clear that he wasn't rebelling for the sake of rebelling. He said to himself, "You know very well why I made that choice." Even so, this only solves one part of the problem. Rewriting TEYVAT's laws may be enough to conceal the world from within its own boundaries, but it cannot erase TEYVAT's existence from the rest of the universe. That's exactly why Nurgestuk concluded that Project Lunar Veil was a failure in principle. You can alter how reality is perceived inside TEYVAT, but the moment an observer steps outside those laws, they immediately recognize that TEYVAT exists. And I think this gives an entirely new meaning to one of the oldest loading screen quotes in the game that just becomes an overused meme at this point. TEYVAT has its own laws. Given there's never been a literal example of this case happening because the False Sky actually did a really good job at hiding itself from the universe. At least for now. The Abyss had already reached TEYVAT long ago because of Nibelung's corruption, but there's very little evidence that other civilizations across the Sea of Stars have discovered its existence other than the Traveler siblings, which I'll talk about in a bit. That said, however, there are two cases of something like this happening. The first case is where an outsider that is not a descender entered TEYVAT in more recent years, namely Skirk, who at least entered after the Cataclysm and when Verena played as the Hydro Archon of Fontaine. Even though she is not a descender, she is an outsider. Even though she entered without ever having her memories altered when she entered TEYVAT, she immediately recognized that TEYVAT exists and is well hidden because Lofi, who wields the power of space as implied in his Stygian Onslaught weapon skin, broke the false sky for her. She also knew that the moon in the sky prior to Not Cry events was a false one because she already saw the Eternal Moon's remnants and the Frost Moon's intact body yet devoid of life at that time. This is already proof that the experiment did work, but it only works to the point it can hide itself, but not enough to make other life forms not notice its existence. Now that's from the outside. What's from the inside is actually something we experienced plenty of times already, that being the Irminsul. Whenever its records are altered, everyone connected to it has their memories rewritten accordingly, unless those memories are preserved through an obscure medium such as fairy tales. Scaramouche and Rukkhadevata are the perfect examples of this. Once their existence was erased from the Irminsul, history itself wasn't undone, people simply remembered it differently. In that sense, Nur-Gestuk's experiments operates on a similar principle. He altered the perception of anyone entering his laboratory, making a hideous statue of Ungien appear completely ordinary. The reality itself never changed, only the observer's understanding of it. If we remember what happened in Truth Amongst the Pages of Purana Archon Quest, Collei experienced exactly this phenomenon through her dreams, where everyone's perception of reality was gradually being manipulated. If the Torre succeeded in rewriting the Irminsul himself, that altered perception would not have remained confined to Sumeru, it would have eventually spread across the entirety of TEYVAT. So those are the explanations of the important notes. Some are not as crucial as the topics we're going to talk about in this video, so I'll leave them at that. Now we're going to talk about my personal speculations of this world quest. But of course, before we continue, do know that this video took some time and effort to make. I even argued this might be one of the hardest video I make so far since a lot of the notes are using words that I don't normally understand, so I would appreciate it if you can hit the like and subscribe button because it helps this channel to be pushed by the algorithm and it lets me know that I'm doing a good job. With that said, let's continue. One theory that immediately came to my mind after finishing this quest is the Phanes is the Traveler's Spaceship AI theory. Before and after I played the quest, I expected whether the game would mention anything related to this theory or not. For context, this theory has been appearing ever since Luna 4's Archon Quest, where we obtained the Traveler's alternate outfit for the first time, and it introduces us to what the Traveler's spaceship's AI can do. One of them is terraforming a land, hence why the community started theorizing if Phanes is the Traveler's spaceship's AI. Obviously, I'm not expecting them to say Phanes is AI done right to our face, but I would expect them to at least make this theory either become stronger or weaker. Turns out, it just adds more questions than answers, so of course, more brain juice has to be sacrificed in the making of this theory. So let's dissect it. We learned that there used to be a research lab at Moontide Sea. The reason the place became what it is now is because Phanes crashed into this place specifically, causing the whole research lab to be destroyed while the destroyed lunar veil spread across the entire ruins, turning it into the Moontide Sea we know of today. Do note that the lunar veil was meant to cover the whole moon first, then it can cover TEYVAT. This step is important because the moon remained safe while they're doing Project Moongazer, as the Sea of Stars were filled with the Abyss. By this point, the project hasn't even started, let alone the lunar veil wasn't even complete. With that being the case, the transmitted message has not yet reached the Traveler siblings because there's no message that they can receive yet, and Project Moongazer only started after Phanes already created the false sky, and TEYVAT was almost in the brink of destruction, not thanks to the War of Funerary Flame. With that, there's two major timeline discrepancies that somehow try to fight this theory. Number 1, Phanes already entered TEYVAT before the message was received by the traveler, and 2, the spaceship only caught the message at least 1,000 years after Phanes terraformed TEYVAT. Now I say somehow because they either support the theory or counter it, depending on how you see it. To answer that question, we first need to understand when Phanes actually arrived compared to when Project Moongazer began transmitting messages into space. First, the lunar veil was being created, and by this point, the veil is not yet complete. Shortly after, Phanes entered TEYVAT and crashed into the lunar veil, destroying the lab in the process and creating the Moontide Sea we know of today. After arriving, Phanes talked with the moon goddesses and they accepted them as guests. After some talk, Phanes told the goddesses about the new order, with Arya and Canon agreed because of their curiosity, but Sonnet disagreed on the outset. Phanes waged war with the dragons and Lusalim gave away his research materials to Phanes. The false sky was created and both Phanes along with his 4 shades governed TEYVAT. The moon goddesses accepted them as the new ruler of TEYVAT with the same goal to preserve the world from the abyss and remain faithful to their duty to preserve TEYVAT until Nibelung returned. At least 1,000 years later, Nibelung returned and brought the abyss, causing the War of Funerary Flame. Around this time, whether before or after the war concluded, Project Moongazer finally started sending messages to the Sea of Stars. Finally, the Traveler's spaceship caught the message, but it was heavily distorted, causing the siblings unable to recognize which planet it came from. At the same time, the travelers already left their world for thousands of years and they were unable to visit TEYVAT at that time because they were caught up by something else. Now from that timeline, there's a clash with the theory because Phanes already came before the traveler's spaceship even received the message. Like I said, depending on how you see the timeline, this can either become a counter or a supporting material, so let's go with the supporting side first. If Phanes is the AI, then they made a jump when the Traveler's spaceship passed TEYVAT for the first time. We learned in Luna 4 that the spaceship did pass TEYVAT thousands of years ago, but it's never made a stop. Since the game specifically mentioned these events to exist in the spaceship's logs, and the Traveler explicitly said that it happened thousands of years ago, this could imply that Phanes, assuming they are the AI, made a jump to the Frost Moon while leaving the Travelers inside the spaceship. With its terraforming capabilities, the AI terraformed TEYVAT, and considering Phanes threw the Frost Moon outside of the False Sky, this meant that they were aware of the Project Moongazer and have no intention in stopping the transmission, since TEYVAT was already hidden from the rest of the universe. Not only that, despite the Frost Moon being placed outside of the False Sky and exposed to the abyss for thousands of years, the moon didn't show any signs of corruption at all, even after it returned to TEYVAT under the False Sky. As Columbina speculated, Phanes might have flung the Frost Moon with countermeasures at hand, or the abyss didn't constantly watch the Frost Moon as it is busy infiltrating TEYVAT. Either that, or the Archeolan energy is enough to combat the abyss, since the engraving at Hisi Island was rich in this power and was used by the Hyperboreans as a bunker during the city's destruction. I won't explain too much on this, but I highly recommend you to watch Kat's video talking about this. That said, since the Frost Moon is also the place where Phanes placed the Traveler's spaceship at, this could mean that the spaceship was deliberately placed there in order for the siblings to not leave TEYVAT, as the world is already prepared for their eventual arrival. If we look at this as a counter-argument, then remember what the Traveler speculated and what actually happened from what we know so far. He speculated that the first who made the jump was actually their sibling, and he did not just speculate that out of nowhere. Lumine was found already outside of the spaceship during the cataclysm, even though the Traveler was still slumbering without him knowing they were in TEYVAT, and the spaceship was found completely closed ever since it first crashed at Notcry. This is where things become interesting because Phanes wasn't the only one approaching TEYVAT. Our sibling was summoned to TEYVAT by the Khaenri'ahns, and the spaceship's fall was already recorded by the Universitas Magistrorum, as implied in one of the name cards you can obtain through achievements. Whether the spaceship happens to be pulled by the Khaenri'ahns or not remains unknown, But I do believe to be the latter because our sibling tried to find us but to no avail until Diridit told her about it in the Space and Time for You Archon quest. Besides, we don't know exactly when the thousands of years ago the spaceship passed TEYVAT because it was very likely after they obtained the message. The sibling became the prince or princess of Kyria prior to the Cataclysm and way longer than 500 years ago. Weirder yet, as we learn in Space and Time for You, they forgot their memories when they entered TEYVAT. In other words, the timeline still doesn't perfectly line up. Whether Phanes truly is the Traveler's AI, or whether these are two entirely separate events remains ambiguous. But like I said, both can be a supporting material or a counter-argument depending on how you see it, and if it were me, both are interesting interpretations. But I do think Phanes is not the Traveler Spaceship's AI, and this update further solidifies my stance on that notion. With that out of the way, let's move on to why the dragons needed a descender. First of all, did Lusalim really just betray the dragons? The answer is yes, he did betray them. There really isn't another way to interpret it. Even Lusalim admitted it himself in his own notes and implied he was eventually judged by the dragons. However, he had a very good reason why. If we look back at Nurgestuk's experiments results, he concluded that you have to alter the perception of reality to hide TEYVAT. If you want to do that to the entire universe, then you have to alter that perception to the rest of the universe, but that is impossible even for a descender to achieve. At the same time, however, this is the reason why Lusalim gave away his research material, because for the dragons, achieving this is impossible, since you have to alter the rules of TEYVAT in order to really hide the world from its surroundings. Since Phanes had a will that could rival TEYVAT's laws, they have the power to at least complete the false sky in order to hide it from the abyss. Now this is less of a theory, but more so a what-if type of situation. But if Nibelung met Phanes prior to his corruption, do you think they'll actually work together? Personally, I think the answer is yes. So you see, the reason Nibelung left TEYVAT is to end the abyss once and for all, but before he left, he told the moon goddesses that every life forms in the Sea of Stars are allies. He likely told this to the dragons as well, and even if he didn't, the message that Ungien received is already a good enough answer that they're not alone in facing the abyss. This is also the reason why the moon goddesses accepted Phanes, but of course they eventually had other plans and took over TEYVAT. If Nibelung and Phanes met, I think they might have a common ground as to how they can defeat the abyss. Ironically enough, albeit of Morning Star and Moon implies that Nibelung didn't have to live in the first place because the answer was already in TEYVAT all along, referring to, of course, the 7 elements. The elements we know of today, Anemo, Geo, Electro, Dendro, Hydro, Pyro, and Cryo, are capable of countering the abyss by splitting the light realm into 7 elements using phlogiston as the basis. From what I see, Nibelung is on the offensive side in dealing the abyss since he wants to end the calamity once and for all, while Phanes is on the defensive side in dealing with the abyss with preserving life as much as possible. Together, they might have stood a far greater chance against the abyss than either could alone. Alas, that is no longer possible because Nibelung is already dead. However, it's possible that his will is still alive because anomalous tree marrow implies that Nibelung is still there somehow. Whether there's more explanation to that or not remains unknown, but what we now know is that Nibelung is no more. However, the question still remains. Can Nibelung actually save the entire universe if he is still alive and not corrupted by the abyss? Maybe, and the reason is because his will is stronger than anything that is in the Sea of Stars. It's the reason why the Voyager told Nibelung about the abyss in the first place, and while I am aware that a lot of you think she is the main culprit for Nibelung's corruption, what she did wasn't necessarily a bad thing either to some degree. Sure, she broke the rules of her kind, but if we look at Ysna'qurel's message again, it doesn't matter whether she told Nibelung about the abyss or not because they will find TEYVAT anyway. Also, a lot of people think that Nibelung is the true villain, but at the end of the day, his villainy began because of the Abyss. The truth of the matter that made him turn the moon as a weapon to destroy TEYVAT was also because of the Abyss, where its nature is destructive. Now, whether he willingly accepted the power of the Abyss or not remains unclear, but from my personal standpoint, I doubt he'll do that anyway, because again, he declared all life forms in the universe as allies. As for Phanes, does this mean he is bad? No, I don't think so. Like I said at the beginning of my video, this world quest does not look or point fingers on who is bad or not. It's the fact that the story expands from TEYVAT versus the Abyss into the universe versus the Abyss, which I believe this is just a teaser and they will expand more of this storyline in Ysna'qurel later on. If anything, this world quest justifies why Phanes did what they did. Now let's ignore that Phanes is the spaceship's AI, and even if they are, Phanes witnessed the destruction of worlds not thanks to the Abyss, which is also the same with the spaceship's AI. Since they already saw this destruction, is also the reason why canon states they became paranoid with the Abyss and covered TEYVAT with the false sky. As someone who has the will that can transcend TEYVAT's laws, this is the reason why Lusalim gave his research away. Now whether Phanes has another plan to defeat the Abyss or not remains unclear, but I would imagine that they do. What they are doing right now is clearly defending humans and TEYVAT from the Abyss, but like what Maagees-Geti said, hiding TEYVAT is just going to delay the inevitable destruction because it's either going to be discovered by the Abyss eventually or just suffocating the life forms in TEYVAT. We already saw this happening with the Hyperboreans, the Langanis, and the Arcadian humans, and this already happened before the angels rebelled. For my personal theory, I think Phanes is buying time, and I think they realized it themselves. Whether they're buying time until humans can truly defeat the Abyss themselves, or whether they're waiting for someone to transcend the rules of TEYVAT is unknown, but they are far from omnipotent, with the angels and Arya say so themselves as the witness of Phanes' government. The fact they lost their function and had to create the Archon system using the Third Descender's remains to consolidate that loss is also a proof of that statement. But even so, I think Phanes believed that hope is still on the horizon. One thing that you need to remember is that Phanes kept TEYVAT alive for so long, and if it wasn't from them, TEYVAT would have fell thousands of years ago. Yes, their government is very extreme, and while I personally don't agree with what they're doing, there's a good reason why, and whether you agree with those decisions or not, they were clearly attempting to preserve TEYVAT. If anything, the VIII rebellion wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Phanes, who nurtured TEYVAT for a very long time now. Do I think Phanes even intended for the VIII to rebel? Maybe. Do I think they knew this would happen from the very beginning? Also possible. Whether Phanes anticipated that day or not, one thing is certain. Everything happening in Ysna'qurel is only possible because TEYVAT survived long enough to reach this point. And perhaps that is the one outcome Phanes wanted more than anything else. Until the truth eventually surfaced itself, this is where our analysis has to end. Before we end, there's one more thing that I want to mention, but I don't have any concrete proof. Let's just say it's a food for thoughts and random things that suddenly came to my mind at the end of writing this video. You see, Apep was already mentioned as the Lord of Dendro in Maagees-Geti's notes. She already bore that title long before Phanes established the 7 Archons. This goes the same with Zhongli, who was already born prior to the funerary year, and from Zibai's character story too, his title, aside from the Heavens Star, is the Lord of Geo. Apep also said that some of the dragon sovereigns either killed, hid, or followed Phanes. With that, do you think that Zhongli might be one of those sovereigns that follow Phanes, more specifically, the Geo Dragon Sovereign? Could this also explain why he later entered a contract with the Tsaritsa, a contract meant to end all contracts? Well, until more lore about Zhongli comes out, this is where the video has to end. By the way, the next few videos will mostly be commentary, but I'll do my best to make some lore videos in the meantime. I also want to focus on another project after this, so if my upload schedule is a bit slower than usual, you know the reason why. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you on the next one. Jana!